Welcome back for our In Focus discussion tonight. As restrictions loosen and more people are vaccinated, normal life seems to be slowly returning to Utah. That means more theaters, more movies, more street festivals, and more. So how does all this happen, and are planners ready for this, and are people ready to get back into crowds again? Joining us now via Zoom is Kyrene Gibb with some insight on this. She is the Vice President of Research for Y2 Analytics, which recently completed a study on where Utahns stand on getting back to arts and entertainment. Kyrene, great to have you on the show. Thanks for your time tonight. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me, Glenn.
You bet. You started your research by looking at the types of entertainment people participated in before the pandemic. Did anything jump out to you?
You know, we find that family-friendly activities are really at the top of the list here. About 3 out of 4 voters statewide indicated that they frequently attended festivals, cultural events, or parades, or were visiting zoos or botanical gardens. And about 62% were frequently attending fireworks shows. So definitely some of those crowd pleaser events at the top of the list. And then we find that a majority of voters were also frequently visiting museums and art galleries, or plays and theater performances and live sporting events as well.
Yeah, those are big numbers. That's a lot of people interested in that. Let's break this down a little bit. You asked about how the pandemic affected those who participated, both as a comparison between public health and the economy, and as a list of choices of financial, physical, and mental health, even social life. So what were the results, and more importantly, how do you interpret those results?
Yeah, so I think our survey results overall show that there's certainly been a toll taken on voters' lives over the course of the pandemic, but we also find that there's reason to believe there's a light at the end of the tunnel here. So an overwhelming majority of voters suggest that the pandemic has had a negative impact on their mental health and social lives especially. But we also find that a majority of voters say that the virus has had no effect on their financial well-being, which is relatively good news. We also see that majority of voters feel that current precautions and measures being taken are enough to mitigate the risk of the virus. And 8 out of 10 voters say that they currently feel confident in their ability to protect themselves from the effects of the coronavirus.
So since the pandemic is all about large groups of people, you polled on different forms of gathering, talking, shopping at big box retailers, eating at a restaurant. What was it that surprised you, if anything, about this, and where did arts and entertainment end up?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that was most surprising here is just how many voters feel comfortable engaging in some of those day-to-day activities that would indicate some sense of normalcy. So when we think about shopping and dining out, participating in the local economy in those ways, a majority of voters currently feel comfortable participating in those activities, and they're doing those things frequently. That said, for about 60% of voters, it's been more than a year since they visited live entertainment or cultural venues.
You also asked the question of what participants would consider participating in, regardless of restrictions. What did you learn there?
Yeah, so along similar lines, we find that regardless of current restrictions, the things that voters feel comfortable doing are some of those day-to-day activities. Attending restaurants and dining in, shopping at local businesses. Those things, we have about 90% of voters who say they're currently comfortable doing those things. Comparatively, 62% say they would currently feel comfortable visiting an entertainment or cultural venue. So some more hesitancy expressed in that regard.
So you did some follow-up with those who said they were currently uncomfortable doing things right now, and asked when they would be comfortable. What kind of answers did you get there?
Yeah, so we find that a majority of those who say that they're currently uncomfortable participating in, especially the live entertainment and cultural sector, expect that within the next 6 months, they'll be ready to return to those venues. They'll feel comfortable engaging in those activities. And we just find about 13% of voters who expect that it'll take more than a year before they feel comfortable returning to the cultural sector.
So some very interesting data here. One of the things that surprised me that you said the most was the financial situation of the majority of those who participated. So sum this all up for us. What did you learn from those who participated, and what would you say is the biggest takeaway here?
Yeah, so overall, Utah voters have fared relatively well in terms of the economic impacts of the virus. And there's been a lack of these opportunities to engage in the arts and cultural sector. And that's something that voters have really missed. There are indicators that they anticipate spending more and participating in these activities more frequently post-pandemic. So a lot of desire to get back to those live entertainment and cultural venues that are such a big part of life in Utah.
Yeah, it sounds like people are ready to get back, and even those who were a bit hesitant aren't really that far off from being comfortable with that as well. Is that a fair way to say that?
Absolutely, yeah. We see most voters who, even those who do feel uncomfortable right now, who might be expressing some of that hesitancy, we see most of those voters feeling comfortable re-engaging in the next 3 to 6 months, which bodes well for summer concert season, parades, festivals, all of those things that we really missed out on last year in the height of the pandemic.
Yeah, and we know some of those are already set to return this summer, so we will see how that pans out. But I think your research is spot on. People are going to be itching to get back to that. We appreciate your time. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much.
Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on getting back to arts and entertainment. Joining us now in studio is Matthew Castillo. He's the director of the Salt Lake County Department of Arts and Culture, and via Zoom we have Ernesto Balderas, Communications Director for the Utah Cultural Alliance. We appreciate having both of you gentlemen with us. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you so much, Glen.
You bet. Interesting conversation. Ernesto, let's go ahead and start with you. We're going to hit a few things with you before we get to Matthew. First, how much money do arts and culture contribute to Utah's economy?
Of course. Well, the cultural industry, with the fantastic work that they do and the enormous investment that our legislature makes to the industry, generates roughly $7.2 billion toward the state's economy. And this is, of course, after employing over 155,000 Utahns across the many cultural organizations that we have here. This figure may seem a little arbitrary for those who aren't necessarily involved in the industry, but according to the analysis of the most recent year we have data for, these 155,000 jobs represent a 4% growth, making Utah the third fastest growing state in the cultural industry. And the combination of this incredible revenue and job generation shows that the cultural industry is a key economic driver for Utah.
Yeah, that's big money, and just by looking at that you can tell how hard the industry and state were hit with the pandemic. We're going to get more into that in just a second, but Ernesto, first talk about how much a typical Utahn spends at a specific event.
Of course. So a typical Utahn for specific events that we have found, according to the most recent data we have, usually spends about $66 to $400, and it can vary in between that range. So that is quite a large range. But three things that we found, especially within this survey, were really important. First, we found that visitors to museum and various educational events, such as conventions or conferences like the Utah Museum Association's annual conference, spend on average about $183. Audiences who attend live performances, such as plays, musical concerts, or other shows, spend on average about $170. And lastly, audiences who attend public events such as live sporting events like a Real Salt Lake match or the many annual sheep parades that you'll find throughout Utah spend on average about $131. So these figures are extremely significant, as it shows that when Utahns purchase their $20 tickets or they go to a free event, they're still spending money in terms of transportation, restaurants, and additional activities that really benefit small businesses in Utah's economy as a whole, as well as the cultural industry.
Yeah, very good point. That's one I wanted to make sure we made, so I appreciate you hitting on that there. Now let's get back to what we talked about earlier. How much money did the arts and entertainment industries lose during the pandemic?
Of course. So unfortunately, the COVID-19 pandemic has caused a significant economic loss for the cultural industry. And according to our most recent data that we have, that was collected by us and the Utah Department of Heritage and Arts, the cultural industry has lost over roughly 25,300 jobs. And in addition to that, the industry has reported a loss of roughly $76.5 million in revenue since the beginning of the pandemic. Now, of course, even with these losses, there are obviously many organizations that are still able to provide programming even right now and prepare for their upcoming seasons later this year. And this is really thanks to the investment made by the Utah legislature. I mean, just last year, they contributed over $29.7 million toward pandemic relief for the industry, along with some further assistance this year. So we're extremely grateful for their investment in our industry. Now, with that being said, many of our organizations have collectively reported that they still possess over $17.5 million in ticket rollover liabilities. So the need is still great for the cultural industry going forward.
Yeah, and again, as you mentioned, other businesses outside of the specific industry, you know, your restaurants, Uber drivers, others also losing money when the pandemic hit as well. All right, Matthew, let's bring you into the conversation. Talk about the types of events most people are most willing to attend right now as we speak.
Sure. Well, from the survey, we saw that people are most comfortable engaging in outdoor events or events in large spaces. So that's things like outdoor concerts in amphitheaters, zoos, botanical gardens, aquariums, and so forth. And that certainly makes sense, and that's good news that we're heading into the summer with warmer months where weather is likely to, less likely to impact that. And we're also seeing arts and culture organizations respond to that, and we're seeing a lot of events take place in kind of unconventional places and outdoor settings, so things like concerts in parks or even concerts in parking garages. So it's been really interesting to see how the arts and culture industry has innovated through all this. I will also mention that, you know, we have seen through the survey that although indoor concerts are the types of events that people are least comfortable engaging with, we do still see that, you know, a significant portion, just over 50%, are comfortable with that. And so, while of course we hope that number will increase here shortly, we are encouraged to see that, and that's certainly reflected in the types of attendance we see at reduced capacity performances that are starting to take place.
I was going to say, you have to look at that though and stay there's still a high demand, because I know the two of you are familiar with Hell Center Theater in Sandy. They've been open for a while now, and demand has been huge there. So people are obviously still willing to go indoors as well right now.
Yeah, we certainly are seeing that, and we have other venues that are at lower capacity and are selling tickets there. So we're really encouraged by that, and we just encourage everyone to take the health and safety guidelines that are in place at whatever venue you may be visiting, to take those health and safety guidelines seriously, because that's really what's going to let us get back to business as usual.
Yeah, let's dig a little more into that, because you did ask people, you know, what would make you feel safer in these types of environments, and sanitation was at the top of the list. What did you learn there?
Yeah, well, that wasn't too surprising. You know, cleaning and sanitization has been one of the things that local health authorities have been, you know, really focusing on since the beginning of the pandemic, so that really makes sense. And of course, at Salt Lake County Arts and Culture in our venues, we've been taking that very seriously. You know, regularly sanitizing high touch points, doing a full sanitization of the auditoriums in between every performance. But we also know as the pandemic has progressed and more has been learned about the virus, that there are a lot of other health and safety measures that are really important. And so we continue to place a high focus on those as well. So things like requiring face masks, symptom checking as patrons are entering the theater. And so, of course, we really want to take a multifaceted approach in making sure that we're keeping our spaces healthy and safe.
Okay, we're going to hit on one last graphic in this segment before we come back. Here's what people are expecting to start to do in the future as their safety concerns are addressed. Talk about what we found out there and what it means in regards to gearing up for these events.
Yeah, so again, we're seeing a lot of interest in outdoor events, festivals, parades, and things like that, and we're seeing a lot of those activities return this summer across Salt Lake County and across the state as well. But we're also seeing these things taking place in kind of a unique and creative way. So for instance, Living Traditions Festival, which typically takes place in Washington Square in downtown Salt Lake City, is kind of one large event over one weekend. We're now seeing it take place throughout the city in a lot of smaller events, so that again we can place a really high focus on health and safety, but still have a lot of fun and take care of these, take part in these kinds of events.
All right, stay right where you are. We're going to continue this conversation with Matthew Castillo, Director of the Salt Lake County Department of Arts and Culture, and Ernesto Balderas, Communications Director for the Utah Cultural Alliance. That's right after the break. All right, we are wrapping up our In Focus discussion tonight on getting back to arts and entertainment. We continue the conversation with Matthew Castillo, Director of the Salt Lake County Department of Arts and Culture, and Ernesto Balderas, Communications Director for the Utah Cultural Alliance. Matthew, one quick question for you. What did you see from demographics when it came to rural Utah versus the bigger cities on this survey and their attitudes?
So we did see some differences. Overall, it was largely the same, but we did see that in more populated urban areas like Salt Lake County, that we did see tend to be a stronger focus on the public health impacts of the virus. Generally less comfortable attending events, whereas in other areas of the state, more emphasis in carrying on the economic impacts and generally more comfortable attending different types of events. But overall, the numbers were pretty similar across the state.
Okay, Ernesto, we're talking about this survey that we broke down a bit at the top of the show. How will organizations now put that information to use, and how can it help guide them as they open back up more?
Well, as we tell everyone, our job as the Cultural Industry Association is never to tell organizations what to do, but instead use the information that we present to make the best decision for their communities, audiences, and staff. Now, with that being said, we would encourage cultural organizations to look at how over 53% of audiences are still uncomfortable attending a live events, but report that they would be willing to attend within the next 6 months. That is a very huge figure. In addition, we would like to see cultural organizations to use our results of what would make Utahns most comfortable in attending once again. This includes regular sanitization of high-touch surfaces, hosting live events outdoors, requiring staff to wear face masks, or even requiring continued 6-foot social distancing between all attendees. Now, again, what works for member organization Moab Music Festival may not work for Utah Museum of Contemporary Art. We merely encourage all of our organizations, especially within the cultural industry, to look at these results and make the safest, most comfortable decision for their audiences.
Okay, good point there. Matthew, do you expect any additional hurdles to putting on events or opening up more this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to continue to place a strong focus on health and safety. You know, we're continuing to see a lot of events take place in kind of unusual places, as we do need to focus on face covering, social distancing, things of that nature. A great example of that is Open Streets in downtown Salt Lake City, a program hosted by the Downtown Alliance, where a large section of Main Street in downtown is being closed off for pedestrians to do more expanded outdoor dining and all sorts of arts and culture events starting the Memorial Day weekend. So there are certainly things that still need to be done, and a big focus that needs to be placed there on health and safety as we continue through the summer and into the fall. Okay,
so we've clearly established people are excited to get out and do things again, but are some cases just waiting for organizations like the two you represent to establish those protocols and ultimately make these events happen. So with that in mind, how are y'all moving forward to get the ball rolling, so to speak? Ernesto.
I think that currently, as I said before, we're the Cultural Industry Association, so we firmly advocate for the well-being and for funding of cultural organizations. But I think that we would be hard-pressed not to recommend that we start looking at this data to look at what is going to make audiences feel comfortable, so that way they can start getting back to work, start getting our artists and staff back to work that we have lost over this pandemic, so that way we can lead out on this as part of showcasing what is possible nationally.
And Matthew, your thoughts on leading out on this issue?
Yeah, well, I would say, you know, from the beginning of the pandemic, this has really been a great opportunity to partner across the industry, as well as with elected officials and the health department and so forth. I think that's been one silver lining, is how we've all worked together in order for this to continue to keep audiences safe and artists safe, but still be able to do activities. And one other thing I'll quickly add, I think, you know, a lot of arts organizations have suffered tremendously, and financially in particular, and so I think this is a great opportunity for all of us, if we have the means to, you know, buy season tickets, perhaps donate to your favorite arts organization, or consider a way that you can volunteer your time.
Let's talk about some of the events in the pipeline that the two of you are excited about, and that others will be as well. Of course, we've heard Garth Brooks is coming this summer. We know before the pandemic hit, a lot of people were really excited about Hamilton coming back to the Eccles. So what's in the pipeline? What can we expect? Ernesto, let's start with you.
Sure. So I'm thrilled to see that so many cultural events have started to come back, either opening within the next few days to the next 6 months. For example, we have the music of Andrew Lloyd Webber. It's heading to the Cache Valley Center for the Arts on May 21st and 22nd. The Tragedy of Carmen is premiering at Utah Opera on May 8th. Down in southern Utah, we have Tuacahn. They are kicking off their season with Beauty and the Beast on May 7th and is going until October 23rd, along with Annie premiering on May 14th. The Utah Shakespeare Festival is kicking off their season on June 21st, going until October 9th. And Moab Music Festival is starting their first programming on August 30th. So I think that there's a tremendous amount of cultural events coming back, especially during the summer. And anyone interested can find all of these live events that I just mentioned and more by heading over to nowplayingutah.com to find something that everyone can enjoy.
All right, gentlemen, interesting conversation. Appreciate both of you being here and definitely looking forward to the return of arts and entertainment. Thanks so much.
Thank you.